I believe my younger son's lies helped destroy my eldest's life, and now he's gone. I don't think he'll ever come back, but the one who caused it still acts like he's done nothing wrong. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. This is going to be long, but I need to get this out. Maybe someone will read this and learn from my massive screw-up before it's too late. I, 62 male, have made some serious mistakes in my life. Before I tell you about the biggest one, you need to understand who I am and how I got here. I'm a retired Marine who served 2 tours overseas before coming home and starting a construction company in Phoenix. Worked my tail off for 35 years building commercial buildings and residential developments. Nothing fancy, but honest work that put food on the table and paid for a nice house in Scottsdale. My wife Linda was a school teacher. We met when I was 28 and she was 26, married within a year. We had 2 boys, David, my eldest, and Jake, my youngest. 3 years apart. David was exactly the kind of son you'd want if you're a traditional guy like me. Quiet, respectful, hard worker. Got his engineering degree from ASU, landed a job with a major construction firm doing project management, made good money, around $95,000 a year by the time he was 30. Bought his own house, married a girl named Vanessa, who worked as a dental hygienist. Never asked me for loans, never caused drama, called his mother every Sunday. Jake was different, charismatic as heck, could charm anyone, but always seemed to struggle with responsibility. Bounced between sales jobs, had some gambling debts, lived in a crappy apartment complex. Don't get me wrong, I loved both my boys equally, but David seemed to have inherited my work ethic, while Jake got more of my wife's creative approach to life. The thing about David that really impressed me was how he handled my parents in their final years. My dad had Alzheimer's and my mom had cancer. David spent every weekend for 2 years helping them, managing their medications, taking them to doctor appointments, basically becoming their caretaker, while Jake was usually too busy to help much. When my parents died within 6 months of each other, they left David $180,000 in their will. They specifically mentioned in the paperwork that it was because of all the care he'd provided. Jake got $25,000 and some family heirlooms. Honestly, I thought it was fair. David used part of the inheritance to pay off his mortgage early and put the rest in investments. Smart kid. Vanessa seemed happy. They were talking about having kids. Everything looked good. Jake seemed fine with the inheritance situation, at least outwardly. He even joked at the funeral reception that David earned every penny dealing with Grandpa's mood swings. That should have been my first red flag. In March of 2017, everything changed. Jake showed up at our house on a Sunday afternoon looking like he'd been crying. Linda immediately went into mom mode, making coffee and fussing over him while I watched the game. Dad, Mom, I need to tell you something about David. I caught him cheating on Vanessa. The room went dead silent. Linda gasped and grabbed Jake's arm. I muted the TV and turned around. What the heck are you talking about? Jake pulled out his phone and showed us photos. David at some upscale restaurant with a brunette in a tight red dress, holding hands across the table. Another photo of them kissing in what looked like a hotel lobby. Then text messages between them. Explicit stuff about meeting up, how V doesn't suspect anything, and plans to be together soon. The worst part was a voice recording Jake played for us. Clear as day, you could hear David saying he was going to leave Vanessa for this other woman, that he'd been planning it for months. I've been watching this for weeks, Jake said, his voice breaking. I followed him Thursday night and saw them go into the Marriott downtown together. I confronted him yesterday, and he told me to mind my own business. Linda started crying. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. This wasn't the David I knew. The David I raised would never cheat on his wife, never throw away his marriage for some side piece. But the evidence was right there. Photos, messages, his own voice admitting it. There's more, Dad, Jake continued, pulling up bank statements on his phone. I think he's been moving money around, getting ready to divorce Vanessa and hide assets. Look at these transactions. He showed us transfers from David's accounts, credit card applications, loan requests. It looked like David was liquidating everything before making his move. I was furious, beyond furious. Here was my eldest son, the one I was proud of, the one who seemed to have his stuff together, and he was just another lying cheater planning to screw over his wife. We called Vanessa that night. She came over in tears, confirming that David had been working late constantly, being secretive with his phone, distant and cold at home. When we showed her the evidence, she completely broke down. Filed for divorce the next week. I confronted David at his job site the following Tuesday. Walked right onto the construction site in my work boots and hard hat like I belonged there. We need to talk, now. David looked confused, then worried when he saw my face. Dad? What's wrong? I handed him printed copies of the photos. You want to explain this garbage to me? His face went white. He started stammering about how it wasn't what it looked like, how Jake was lying, how the photos had to be fake somehow. Fake? Your own voice on that recording is fake too? He kept insisting it wasn't real, getting more desperate. But I'd seen enough lying pieces of garbage in the Marines to know what guilt looked like. You're a disgrace to this family, I told him. Don't come to the house until you're ready to tell the truth and fix what you broke. That was the last real conversation I had with my eldest son, and it was all based on lies. After I confronted David, things moved fast. Too fast, looking back. Jake was at our house constantly, updating us on the situation, showing us more evidence he'd found, helping Vanessa with divorce paperwork. I hate doing this to my own brother, Jake would say, but Vanessa deserves better. She doesn't deserve to be cheated on and have her life destroyed by some selfish jerk. Linda and I agreed completely. Jake was being the stand-up guy, the one with integrity. David was being a typical cheating husband. David tried calling us repeatedly, left voicemails begging us to listen, saying Jake was lying about everything, that he could explain if we'd just give him 5 minutes. But we'd heard enough lies. Jake advised us to block his number. He's just going to keep manipulating you guys. This is what cheaters do when they get caught. They blame everyone else. A month later, Jake came to us with more bad news. I found out David has been using my name for some credit applications. I think he's trying to destroy my credit score to cover his tracks before he disappears with that woman. I saw red. Identity theft? Using his own brother's name? That crossed a line from crappy husband to criminal. Jake showed us documentation. Credit card applications with his name but David's information. Loan requests that didn't make sense. I need to file police reports before he ruins my financial future. We backed him 100%. Helped him file the reports, contacted credit agencies, even hired a lawyer to help with the paperwork. In hindsight, I should have looked more carefully at those documents. Some had David's name on them, not Jake's, but Jake explained that David was probably planning to transfer everything later. The final blow came when Jake told us David had been draining family accounts, including money from the inheritance our parents left him. He's liquidating everything, Jake said, showing us confusing bank records. Probably getting ready to run off with that woman and leave Vanessa with nothing. Linda was devastated. How could he steal from his own grandparents' memory? That's when we decided to contest the inheritance. If David was going to be a lying, cheating thief, he didn't deserve money my parents specifically left for him because of all his care and sacrifice. We hired lawyers and worked to transfer the inheritance to Jake instead. It seemed like justice. The honest son should get the money, not the one destroying the family. David tried to fight it, of course. Called our lawyer dozens of times, sent letters, even showed up at our house once. I answered the door and he looked terrible. Thinner, unshaven, desperate. Dad, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. Jake is lying about everything. I never cheated on Vanessa. I never stole any money. Those photos are fake. Get off my property, I told him. I don't want to hear any more lies. I'm not lying. I can prove it if you'll just... I slammed the door in his face. A few weeks later, we heard David had been beaten up badly outside a bar downtown. Broken ribs, black eyes, needed stitches. Jake heard about it through mutual friends. Honestly, I thought he probably deserved it. Maybe he'd tried cheating on the side piece too, or owed money to the wrong people. We didn't call to check on him. 6 months after everything started, David was gone. Quit his job, moved out of his apartment, changed his phone number. Complete radio silence. Good riddance, Linda said. Maybe now this family can heal. Jake married Vanessa 2 years later. Made sense. He'd been her support system through the divorce. Helped her get back on her feet. They bought a house with some of the inheritance money, had 2 kids, seemed happy. We helped with their wedding, babysat the grandkids, had them over for Sunday dinners. Jake used the rest of the inheritance to start his own business. A car dealership that did pretty well. Sometimes relatives would mention seeing David around town, but it was always vague. Someone thought they spotted him at Home Depot or heard he was working construction again under a different name, but he never contacted us. Years went by. Jake and Vanessa's kids called us Grandma and Grandpa. We had birthday parties and holidays and family vacations. If David wanted to throw away his family over some affair, that was his choice. But Jake had been planning something else entirely. Something that would make our punishment of David look like nothing compared to what was coming for us. It was October 2024, 7 years after David disappeared, when everything started falling apart. It began with my nephew Tommy getting jumped outside a sports bar. Tommy is my sister's kid, about David's age, works as an electrician. Good guy, keeps to himself. Definitely not the type to get into bar fights. When my sister called crying at midnight, I knew something was seriously wrong. Jim, Tommy's in the hospital. Someone beat the heck out of him outside Murphy's Tavern. But Jim, it wasn't random. What do you mean not random? Someone filmed it, the whole thing. And they made sure Tommy knew it was being recorded. She sent me a link to a private video file an hour later. I waited until Linda was asleep to watch it, and I wish I hadn't. The video was professionally shot, not some shaky phone recording. Someone with good equipment had positioned themselves to capture everything. You could see Tommy leaving the bar with a couple friends when three guys in hoodies grabbed him, dragged him to an alley, and proceeded to beat him methodically while someone behind the camera filmed it all. But here's the messed up part. You could hear the cameraman giving instructions. Make sure you get his face. Hold him still. This wasn't a random mugging. This was a message. The next day, more family members started calling. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all asking if I'd seen the website. My nephew Tony sent me a link with a warning. Uncle Jim, you need to see this, but you're not going to like it. I clicked on it, and my blood turned to ice. It was a professional website titled The David Thompson Case Files. The first page had a photo of David from before everything went to pieces, smiling in his Marine's dress uniform from my retirement ceremony. Below that were side-by-side comparisons. On the left were the exact photos Jake had shown us years ago. David at the restaurant, the text messages, everything. On the right were the original unedited versions. Same restaurant, same table, same clothes. But the man in the photos wasn't David. It was Jake. The metadata breakdowns showed exactly how the faces had been digitally swapped, what software was used, even timestamps proving when the edits were made. The text messages had similar analysis. The voicemail recording we'd heard of David confessing. Audio forensics proved it was created using voice cloning software, built from samples of David's voice taken from family videos and phone calls. Every piece of evidence Jake had shown us was fake. All of it. But the website didn't stop there. It had financial records showing how Jake had systematically stolen David's identity. Credit applications, loan documents, bank transfers, all traced back to Jake's IP address and handwriting samples. There were even copies of the fake police reports Jake had filed, with notes showing how he'd manipulated the paperwork to make it look like David was stealing from him when it was the opposite. Page after page of evidence showing that Jake had destroyed his brother's life, stolen his wife, his money, his inheritance, and his reputation. And we'd helped him do it. The worst part was a section titled Collateral Damage. It listed every family member who had believed the lies, helped spread them, or benefited from them. My name was at the top. So was Linda's. So was Tommy's, which explained why he'd been beaten up. At the bottom of the page was a simple message: justice is coming. I sat in my garage until 4 a.m., staring at that website, trying to process what I was seeing. Everything I thought I knew about my sons was wrong. David hadn't cheated. David hadn't stolen money. David hadn't been a lying piece of garbage. Jake had manipulated us into destroying our eldest son's life so he could take everything David had worked for: the wife, the money, the inheritance, the family's respect. And we'd been too stupid and too eager to believe the worst about David to see through it. I finally understood why David had been beaten up all those years ago. Jake had spread the cheating story everywhere, to David's co-workers, his friends, Vanessa's family, everyone in our social circle. Someone had decided to teach the cheater a lesson. Except David was never a cheater. He was just the target of the most elaborate lie I'd ever seen. Around 5 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I got in my truck and drove to Jake's house. I didn't knock. I still had a spare key from when Jake lived at home, and I used it. Walked right into his house like I owned the place. Jake was in the living room playing video games, probably some first-person shooter nonsense. Vanessa was in the kitchen making breakfast. The kids were upstairs getting ready for school. I pulled out my phone, opened that website, and threw it down on the coffee table in front of him. Explain this. Jake glanced at the screen, and his face went completely white. For about 5 seconds, he just stared at it. Then he looked up at me with this weak smile. Dad, someone's obviously trying to... Don't. My voice was quiet, but he shut up immediately. Don't you dare lie to me again! Vanessa came out of the kitchen. Jim, what's going on? Sit down, I told her. You're part of this too. Jake tried to speak, but I cut him off. Your cousin Tommy is in the hospital because someone beat the stuffing out of him. You know why? Because his name was on that website. Just like mine. Just like your mother's. I turned the phone so Vanessa could see it. Look at the photo analysis. Look at the financial records. Look at the voice analysis of that recording you helped use to destroy my son's marriage. The silence stretched on forever. Jake kept glancing between me and Vanessa, like they were having some silent conversation. Finally, Jake's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Vanessa jumped in. You said he'd just move away and we'd never see him again. And that's when it all came spilling out. Jake and Vanessa had been having an affair for over a year before she filed for divorce. They wanted to be together but couldn't handle the shame of it. Jake stealing his brother's wife, Vanessa cheating on her husband. So they decided to flip the script and make David the bad guy. Jake had paid some freelance tech guy he found online, someone who did digital effects for independent movies, to create the fake evidence. They used photos of Jake and Vanessa together, but digitally replaced Jake's face with David's. They cloned David's voice using audio from family videos and phone calls. But it went deeper than that. Jake had been planning this for months, going through David's mail, copying his information, learning his routines. He opened credit cards in David's name, took out loans, created a paper trail that made it look like David was stealing money and preparing to run. We just wanted him out of the picture, Vanessa said, crying now. We thought if everyone believed he was a cheater, he'd be too embarrassed to stick around. We never thought you'd actually take his inheritance. But you sure as heck didn't give it back when we did, I said. Jake finally broke down completely. I was jealous, okay? David always had everything together. Good job, nice house, respect from everyone, and then he got all that money from Grandma and Grandpa while I got scraps. It wasn't fair. So, you destroyed his life. I didn't mean for him to get hurt. I never wanted anyone to beat him up. But he had wanted it. Maybe not consciously, but Jake had spread the cheating story to everyone he could think of, knowing someone would eventually decide to teach David a lesson. Where is he now? I demanded. Jake shook his head. I don't know. He really did disappear after everything happened. Changed his name, moved away. I haven't heard anything about him in years. Until now, Vanessa whispered, staring at the website. I looked at it again, really reading it this time. This wasn't just someone setting the record straight. This was a declaration of war. David wasn't hiding anymore. He was coming for all of us. And honestly, we deserved whatever he had planned. The next few weeks were terrible. David filed lawsuits against Jake, Vanessa, me, Linda, and half a dozen relatives who had helped spread the lies or benefited from them. He was demanding full restitution for everything: the stolen inheritance, the identity theft, the destroyed reputation, lost income from the 7 years we'd stolen from his life. But that was just the beginning. Jake's car dealership was suddenly under investigation by the state for fraud and tax evasion. His business license got suspended. His insurance company dropped him. The bank called in his loans. Vanessa lost her job at the dental office when someone sent her boss copies of the website showing her role in the conspiracy. Her professional license was under review. My construction company, which I'd already handed over to my business partner when I retired, was getting investigated too. Turns out some of the money Jake had borrowed from the inheritance had been illegally funneled through company accounts. But David wasn't done. Not even close. The website kept getting updated with new information. Screenshots of Jake and Vanessa's social media posts over the years, bragging about their house, their cars, their vacations, all paid for with David's stolen inheritance. Bank records showing exactly how they'd spent every penny of the $180,000. Then came the personal stuff. Photos of Jake gambling at casinos, losing thousands of dollars of David's money. Records showing Vanessa had been cheating on David for over 2 years before she filed for divorce. Not just with Jake, but with at least one other guy. The most damaging page was titled, The Children. It had DNA test results showing that Jake and Vanessa's youngest kid, the one they'd named after my father, wasn't Jake's. It was David's. My grandson was actually David's son, and Jake had been raising him for 5 years without knowing it. That's when Jake completely lost his mind. He showed up at my house screaming about how David was destroying his family, how this wasn't fair, how he was going to make that psycho pay. Fair? I grabbed him by the shirt and pushed him against the wall. You want to talk about fair? You destroyed your brother's life with lies, stole his money, stole his wife, and now you're crying because he's fighting back? He's trying to take my kids. One of them isn't even yours, you idiot. That's when Linda finally snapped. She'd been quiet through most of this, processing the truth about what we'd done to David. But hearing Jake whine about fairness pushed her over the edge. Get out, she told him quietly. Mom, Get out! She screamed it so loud the neighbors probably heard. You lying piece of trash, get out of my house! I don't want to see you again until David forgives you, and we both know that's never going to happen. Jake left crying like a little boy. 2 days later, he and Vanessa were served with papers for the custody battle over David's biological son. A week after that, they received letters from David's lawyers. He was offering them a deal: full confession, public apology, complete restitution of the inheritance with interest, and they could keep their house and cars. They had 48 hours to respond. If they refused, he was going to destroy them completely. Jake called me that night, sobbing into the phone. "Dad, what do I do? If I confess, I'll go to prison. If I don't, he's going to take everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy your brother's life. Please, Dad, you have to help me. Talk to him. Make him stop." I hung up on him. 2 days later, Jake and Vanessa rejected the deal. That was their biggest mistake. David had been planning this for 7 years, and it showed. Within a week of Jake rejecting the deal, their house was foreclosed on. Turns out the mortgage had been taken out using fraudulent information, which David's lawyers had documented and reported to the bank. Jake's car dealership was shut down permanently. The state found evidence of money laundering, tax fraud, and use of stolen identities in business transactions. Jake was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. Vanessa's professional license was revoked. She was also charged as a co-conspirator in the identity theft scheme. But David saved the best for last. The custody hearing for his biological son was a massacre. David's lawyers presented evidence that Jake and Vanessa had knowingly hidden the child's true parentage, had used money stolen from the child's biological father to raise him, and had created an environment of lies and criminal activity. The judge awarded full custody to David. I was in the courtroom that day. First time I'd seen my eldest son in almost 8 years. He looked different, successful. He was wearing an expensive suit, had professional lawyers flanking him, and carried himself with a confidence I'd never seen before. But his eyes were cold as ice when he looked at our side of the courtroom. When the judge read the custody decision, Vanessa started screaming. She lunged toward David, shouting about how he couldn't take her baby, how he'd never been a real father. David didn't even flinch. He just looked at her with those dead eyes and said, "I'll be a better father than the man who raised him with stolen money." Jake tried to speak to him as we were leaving the courthouse. "David, please. He's the only father that boy has ever known. Don't do this to him." David stopped and turned around. For a second, I thought maybe there was still some compassion left in him. "You're right," he said quietly. "So I'm going to make sure he grows up knowing exactly what kind of man his father really is." That's when I realized David wasn't just taking his son back. He was going to make sure the boy understood why. 3 months later, Jake and Vanessa were convicted on multiple charges. Jake got 8 years in federal prison. Vanessa got 5. Their remaining child went to live with Vanessa's parents. David took his biological son and moved to Colorado, where he'd apparently been living and building his new life for the past several years. Linda had a complete breakdown after the trial. She's in a psychiatric facility now, living in a world where both her boys are still young and none of this ever happened. As for me, I lost everything. The house, the savings, even my Marine pension got garnished to pay David's legal fees and restitution. I'm living in a studio apartment now, working part-time at Home Depot to pay for Linda's medical care. And David? He won, completely and utterly. But he wasn't done with me yet. It's been 2 years since Jake went to prison. I figured David had gotten his revenge and moved on with his life. He had his son, his money, his justice. What more could he want from a broken old man living in a crappy apartment? I found out last month. I was working my shift at Home Depot, helping some customer load concrete bags into his truck, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me, could you help me find some lumber?" I turned around and nearly had a heart attack. David was standing there in jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like any other customer. But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a coincidence. "Hello, Dad." I couldn't speak. Just stood there staring at my eldest son, the one I'd helped destroy, the one who'd spent 7 years planning his revenge against us. "I need some 2x4s for a project," he said casually. "Building a treehouse for my son? His son? My grandson? The boy I'd never met because of the lies I'd believed? David, It's Michael now," he said. "I changed my name legally. David Thompson died 7 years ago, remember? You made sure of that." He followed me to the lumber section, making small talk about wood quality and construction techniques, like we were just old friends catching up. But every word felt like a knife. "You know," he said, examining a piece of pine, "I used to think about this moment, what I'd say to you when I finally had everything I wanted and you had nothing left." I found my voice. "David, Michael, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I need you to know that you're sorry." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, I figured you would be." Eventually, he picked out several boards and I helped him load them onto a cart. As we walked toward the checkout, he kept talking. Jake called me last week from prison. Did you know that? Crying like a baby, begging me to let him see his son. Well, the kid he thought was his son, promising he'd do anything if I'd just show some mercy. What did you tell him? I told him the same thing you told me when I begged you to listen. No. We reached the checkout and David paid cash. As the cashier rang up his purchase, he turned to me one more time. Here's the thing, Dad. I didn't come here for revenge. I already got that. I came here to give you a choice. He handed me a business card. Michael Thompson, owner, Thompson Construction LLC. A Colorado address and phone number. My son is going to grow up knowing the truth about his biological father and the man who raised him for 5 years. He's going to have questions about his grandfather, you. I can either tell him you were part of the conspiracy that destroyed his father's life, or I can tell him you were a good man who made a terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it. I stared at the card, my hands shaking. David continued, the choice is yours. You can stay here, working retail, feeling sorry for yourself, waiting to die alone, or you can come work for me. Help me build the construction company I always wanted to have. Be the grandfather my son deserves. Why? I managed to ask. After everything we did to you? David looked at me for a long moment. Because Jake was always the golden child who could do no wrong. You were harder on me, expected more from me, but you also taught me everything I know about construction, about business, about being a man. The good parts of who I am came from you. He paused, then added, the parts that survived what you did to me anyway. The cashier handed him his receipt and he started pushing the cart toward the exit. Think about it, he called over his shoulder. But don't take too long. My son is 8 years old. If you want to be part of his life, it needs to start soon. And then he was gone. I stood there in that Home Depot for 20 minutes, holding that business card, trying to decide if this was mercy or just another form of revenge. Jake is still in prison. Vanessa got out early and moved across the country to live with her sister. Linda doesn't remember who I am half the time, but I have a choice. I can either die as the man who destroyed his son's life, or I can try to become the grandfather who helped rebuild it. I called the number on the card yesterday. David answered on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. I want to meet my grandson, I told him. Then come to Colorado. But understand this, if you hurt him, if you lie to him, if you let him down the way you let me down, I will make the last 7 years look like a warm-up. Are we clear? We're clear. Good. I'll email you the details. Welcome to the family, Dad. He hung up. I'm driving to Colorado next week to meet the grandson I never knew I had and to work for the son I thought I'd lost forever. I don't know if this is forgiveness or just David's final move in a game I never understood I was playing. But it's more than I deserve, which is probably the point. Jake will die in prison, forgotten and alone. Vanessa will spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for David's next move. But me? I get a second chance. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Sometimes it's watching your enemies destroy themselves. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to have a son who's a better man than you ever were, it's offering redemption to someone who doesn't deserve it. I just hope I'm strong enough to earn it.